I wasn't exactly thrilled about going back, but something inside me, some stubborn part, just didn't want to carry the resentment forever. My father, Thomas, was turning 57, and despite everything that had happened between us, I thought maybe, just maybe, I could be the bigger person. Things had been tense ever since I inherited my grandmother Eleanor's estate. She and I had always been close. I spent my childhood in her study, listening to her stories, learning about her struggles. She saw something in me, something no one else in my family did. And when she passed, she left me everything. That decision turned my parents, especially my mother, Patricia, into my worst enemies. It wasn't my fault, but they saw it that way. To them, I had taken something that belonged to them. The family gatherings became awkward, cold. Then they stopped inviting me altogether. It wasn't a slow fade, it was a complete cutoff. Oliver, my younger brother, was the only one who hadn't completely turned his back on me. We weren't particularly close, but at least he kept in touch. Still, I thought maybe time had healed some wounds. I bought a bottle of my father's favorite whiskey, an expensive brand. He only drank on special occasions, and a box of gourmet cigars. A peace offering. Naive, maybe, but I had to try. When I arrived at the house, Oliver was the one who answered the door. He looked surprised. "Jessica, I didn't know you were coming." "Yeah," I said, forcing a smile. "Thought I'd stop by for Dad's birthday." He hesitated, but then shrugged and let me in. The house hadn't changed: polished floors, crystal chandeliers, everything meant to impress. Laughter and conversation filled the living room. For a second, it felt normal. Then I saw them. My mother's face drained of color, and my father's expression turned to stone. The room fell silent. "You," my father muttered, his voice like steel. "What are you doing here?" I kept my voice calm. "I came to wish you a happy birthday." I lifted the gift bag slightly. "Brought something for you." He scoffed. "We didn't invite you." My mother shook her head. "Why are you even here?" "You always bring trouble." I looked around. The relatives avoided eye contact, shifting uncomfortably. I swallowed the frustration rising in my throat. "Look," I said, my voice steady. "I'm not here to fight. Just wanted to celebrate." My father snorted. "Celebrate? You think gifts make up for everything?" That hit a nerve. Years of being treated like an outsider came flooding back. I clenched my jaw, willing myself to stay calm. Then he pushed it further. "Get out, Jessica. We don't want you here." Something inside me snapped. "Fine," I said, my voice ice cold. "I'll go. But guess what? I've been paying Oliver's rent all this time because you couldn't be bothered to help him. Not anymore. That's on you now." Their faces froze. They hadn't expected me to fight back. I turned and walked away, ignoring the frantic voices calling my name. I didn't stop until I was in my car, my hands gripping the wheel as I tried to calm my racing heart. As I pulled away, I could still hear them shouting from the house, begging, but it was too late. For the first time in years, I had stood my ground. The next morning, my phone wouldn't stop buzzing. Oliver had called me 6 times, left 3 voicemails, and flooded me with texts. I ignored them at first. I needed time to process what had happened, but curiosity got the better of me. I played one of the voicemails. "Jessica, what the hell did you do? Mom and Dad are losing their minds. They're saying you cut me off and that it's all my fault. Call me back." I sighed and tossed my phone onto the bed. Of course they were blaming him. That was their pattern, always finding someone else to throw under the bus. About an hour later, Oliver showed up at my apartment. He didn't even knock. He just walked in like he owned the place. "What the hell, Jess?" he snapped. "Good to see you too," I muttered, crossing my arms. "I'm serious," he said, running a hand through his hair. "Dad called the entire family and told them you threw some kind of tantrum. Now half of them are pissed at me because they think I'm the reason you stopped paying my rent." I raised an eyebrow. "Wait, he told them that?" "Yeah," Oliver said, throwing up his hands. "Uncle Michael called me this morning and asked if I was plotting with you. It's insane." I leaned against the kitchen counter, letting it sink in. I hadn't expected them to go nuclear so quickly. Well, Oliver, I'm sorry you got dragged into this, I said, my tone softer, but I'm done being their scapegoat. They've treated me like garbage ever since Grandma's inheritance. They didn't even want me there last night. I'm not going to keep playing nice when all they do is push me away. He folded his arms. They could have at least talked to me first, you know. I need that money. I sighed. I know, but maybe it's time for them to take some responsibility. They're your parents too. Why should I be the only one looking out for you while they sit around and do nothing? He didn't answer right away. I could tell he was torn. On one hand, he knew I was right. On the other, he was stuck between his loyalty to them and the financial support I had been providing. Finally, he shook his head. This is gonna get ugly. I met his gaze. I'm ready for it. And it did get ugly faster than I expected. By the afternoon, word had spread through the entire extended family. My cousin Michael called, his voice careful, like he was trying not to set me off. Hey, Jessica, he started. I heard about what happened last night. What's going on? I sighed, rubbing my temples. What exactly did you hear? That you ruined the party? I let out a dry laugh. Of course. But, he continued, not everyone is on their side. Uncle Leonard thinks Mom and Dad crossed the line, and Aunt Roberta lit them up for how they treated you. That surprised me. Aunt Roberta usually avoided family drama like the plague. If she was stepping in, that meant she was really pissed. Wow, I said. Didn't see that coming. Yeah, Michael said. But Oliver called me earlier, and he's upset. I think he feels like you threw him under the bus. I pinched the bridge of my nose. Great. That's exactly what I needed. This was spiraling into a full-blown family war. Part of me felt bad for Oliver, but another part of me felt something else. For the first time in years, I wasn't the only one dealing with the fallout. Maybe now, they'd finally see how toxic our parents really were. 2 days later, things escalated again. I had barely finished my morning coffee when my phone rang an unknown number. Against my better judgment, I picked up. We need to talk. I knew that voice. Thomas, I said flatly, gripping my mug. I'm working. You can call me later. No, he snapped. We're doing this now. I sighed, already exhausted. Fine. 20 minutes later, I spotted him standing outside my office building, arms crossed, his face tight with anger. He wasn't even trying to hide it. As soon as I stepped outside, he wasted no time. You embarrassed this family. His voice was controlled, but I could hear the barely restrained fury underneath. Do you realize how many people are turning against us because of your stunt? I scoffed. You mean because I stood up for myself? His jaw clenched. You think you're better than us now, don't you? Better than you? No, I said, keeping my voice even. But I am done letting you treat me like garbage. He took a step closer, lowering his voice. You came to my house on my birthday and caused a scene. I laughed, shaking my head. I came with gifts. You told me to leave. His eyes narrowed. You think a few presents erase what you've done? I stared at him, genuinely stunned. What I've done? You mean existing? Because that's all it took for you to turn on me. His expression darkened. Don't play the victim, Jessica. You know why we're here. You think you're entitled because of Eleanor's money? Without her, you'd have nothing. That hit a nerve, but I refused to show it. Instead, I smiled. That's funny, coming from the man who was banking on an inheritance he never earned. For the first time, he hesitated. A flicker of something crossed his face, shame maybe, or realization. I leaned in slightly. This was never about family. It was about control, and you lost it. For a second, I thought he might actually apologize. But then, just like always, he doubled down. You're going to regret this, he said, voice low and dangerous. I exhaled sharply, looking him dead in the eye. No, Thomas, you are. And with that, I turned and walked away. That night, I got a call from Aunt Roberta. Your father's been going around trying to turn the whole family against you, she said without preamble. telling everyone you betrayed them, that you cut off Oliver out of spite. I groaned. Of course he is. The thing is, she continued, not everyone's buying it. Uncle Leonard told him straight up, you treated Jessica like garbage. Didn't you expect consequences? I blinked. Leonard wasn't exactly known for speaking up. Wait, I said. Leonard said that? He did, Roberta confirmed. And let me tell you, that set Patricia off. She went on a whole rant about how you've always been selfish, how you turned Oliver against them, real Oscar-worthy performance. I sighed, rubbing my temples. And what did Oliver say? Roberta hesitated. That's the thing. He hasn't said much at all. I frowned. That wasn't like him. Then my phone buzzed a text from Oliver. We need to talk. Something's happened. A knot formed in my stomach. What now? I muttered. Roberta sighed. Whatever it is, be careful, Jessica. They're desperate. And desperate people do stupid things. I didn't have a good feeling about this. And I was right. I hesitated before texting Oliver back. After everything that had happened, I wasn't sure I wanted to hear whatever drama he was about to drag me into. But curiosity won out. What's going on? I typed. His reply came almost instantly. Come to Mom and Dad's. It's serious. I stared at my phone, debating whether or not to ignore him. Against my better judgment, I grabbed my keys. 20 minutes later, I pulled up in front of my parents' house. The place looked the same as always, grand, pristine, as if nothing had ever touched it. But I knew better. Oliver met me at the door. He looked tense, his shoulders stiff. They're in the living room, he said quietly. I followed him inside. My parents were sitting side by side on the couch, their expressions unnervingly serious. My mother, Patricia, was the first to speak. We didn't want to tell you this way, she said with a dramatic sigh, but Oliver is in trouble. I crossed my arms. What kind of trouble? My father, Thomas, leaned forward, rubbing a hand over his face as if this whole situation pained him. He's behind on his rent. We just found out that he's about to be evicted. I blinked. What? We can't let that happen, my mother said quickly. He needs your help, Jessica. Just until he gets back on his feet. Something about this felt off. I turned to Oliver. Is this true? He wouldn't meet my eyes. I felt my stomach clench. Oliver. He hesitated, then shook his head. No, I'm not behind. The room fell into stunned silence. I clenched my jaw. So, let me get this straight, I said slowly, turning back to my parents. You're telling me that Oliver's landlord called you instead of him? And this is the first you're hearing about it? Patricia's face tightened. Look, Jessica, this isn't the time to question details. The point is, your brother needs you. I turned back to Oliver. And you went along with this? He shifted uncomfortably. They pressured me. I didn't know what else to do. I exhaled sharply, anger boiling just beneath the surface. So this was all just some elaborate manipulation? You dragged me here under false pretenses because you thought it would make me feel guilty enough to hand over money? Jessica, don't overreact, my mother snapped. We were trying to protect Oliver. You're the one who cut him off. I let out a humorless laugh. No, Patricia. I cut you off. I turned to Oliver, shaking my head. You're a grown man. If you needed help, you could have come to me. But instead, you let them drag me into another one of their ridiculous mind games. I didn't know what else to do, he mumbled again. Well, congratulations, I said bitterly. You all just made things 10 times worse. I grabbed my bag and stormed toward the door. Jessica, wait, my father called. I didn't stop. For years, I had put up with their manipulation, their gaslighting, their endless need for control. But this was the last straw. And this time, I wasn't just going to walk away. I was going to make sure everyone knew the truth. I drove home with my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. I wasn't just angry, I was done. Done with the lies, done with the manipulation, done being the scapegoat for a family that never truly wanted me around. As soon as I got home, I grabbed my phone and started making calls. First was Aunt Roberta. They did what? she practically shouted after I told her everything. Yeah, I said, pacing my living room. They faked an emergency to try and guilt me into paying for Oliver again. Unbelievable, she muttered. That's a new low, even for them. I could hear the anger in her voice, but more importantly, I could hear the resolve. Roberta, I'm done keeping quiet. They want to spin their version of the story? Fine. But I'm making sure everyone hears the truth. She exhaled. You know what? Do it. They've been playing this game for years. It's time people see them for who they really are. So that's exactly what I did. Within hours, the truth spread through the family like wildfire. I told Uncle Leonard, who then told Aunt Petra. I told Michael, who wasted no time telling everyone who would listen. The response was swift. Uncle Leonard was the first to call me back. Jessica, I'm disgusted. Your parents have spent years making you out to be the villain. And now, this? I told them I don't want to hear another word from them. Aunt Petra wasn't far behind. I always knew Patricia was manipulative. But this is next level insanity. They used Oliver as a pawn. I'm done. Then came Michael. You obliterated them, he said, almost sounding impressed. They're scrambling to do damage control, but no one's buying it anymore. And it didn't stop there. By the end of the night, my parents had been effectively cut off by most of the family. No one wanted to deal with their toxicity anymore. The people they once controlled had finally had enough. Even Oliver wasn't spared. He texted me late that evening. Please, Jessica, you're making things worse. They're blaming me for everything. I stared at the message for a long moment before replying. They're facing the consequences of their own actions. You chose to side with them. Now you're dealing with the fallout. No more saving him. No more taking responsibility for people who refuse to take responsibility for themselves. A week later, the final blow landed. I got a call from Michael, his voice barely containing his amusement. You're going to love this, he said. Your parents reached out to Aunt Marie. I blinked. Marie? The same Marie who doesn't take anyone's crap? Oh yeah, he said. Apparently, your dad gave her some sob story about how you turned the family against them. You know what she told him? I could hear the grin in his voice. What? She said, and I quote, maybe if you weren't such a controlling narcissist, your family wouldn't hate you. And then she hung up on him. I burst out laughing. It was the first genuine laugh I'd had in weeks. It was over. My parents had spent years manipulating, controlling, and spreading lies. But now, they had no one left, no allies, no sympathy, just each other. And honestly, that was justice. Story 2. Until yesterday, I thought I had a good life. I was a husband, a father, a hardworking man who did everything to provide for his family. 14 years of marriage to Rebecca, and a son, Ethan, who was my world. I worked 2 jobs to make sure he had everything he needed, every opportunity I never had. I was there for every milestone, his first steps, his first words, his first soccer game. And then, in a single moment, everything fell apart. It started like any other day. I got up early, went to my first job in the morning, then my second in the afternoon. I was tired, but looking forward to getting home for dinner with Rebecca and Ethan. But when I walked through the front door, something felt wrong. The house was silent. No sounds from the TV, no smell of dinner cooking, just emptiness. I called out. No answer. I checked Ethan's room first. It was half empty. Some of his clothes were gone. His favorite books, his soccer cleats missing. Panic started creeping in as I rushed to our bedroom. That's when I saw it. A note. Rebecca's handwriting. I picked it up with shaking hands, barely able to focus as I read the words that shattered my world. She and Ethan were gone. And Ethan wasn't my son. Rebecca admitted everything in that letter. 14 years ago, before we got together, she had been involved with another man. She got pregnant and convinced herself the baby was mine. She wanted it to be true, so she let herself believe it. But now, Ethan's real father had come back. A wealthy, successful man, someone who could give them a better life. She had chosen him, not me. And worst of all, according to her, Ethan was excited about it. That was the part that broke me, not the betrayal itself, not the years of deception, but the idea that my son, the boy I had raised, loved, sacrificed for, was so eager to leave me behind. I sat there for hours, numb, unable to process it. I tried calling Rebecca, texting Ethan, but their phones were off. I even drove past Rebecca's parents' house, hoping they were there. Nothing. Just like that, my family was gone, and I had never felt more alone. I took the next few days off work. I couldn't function. I just sat in the house, surrounded by memories of a life that no longer existed. Ethan's trophies were still on the shelf. His dirty laundry was still in the hamper. A half-finished homework assignment sat on the dining table. They had left in a hurry, and yet, somehow, they had taken everything. I went through every emotion: shock, rage, grief. Had I ever really known Rebecca at all? Did Ethan ever feel different? Did he ever suspect I wasn't his biological father? I replayed every moment in my head, searching for clues I had missed. Every hug, every bedtime story, every scraped knee I had bandaged, had it all been a lie? And what about this man, this real father? Where had he been for the last 14 years? Why was he suddenly interested in Ethan now? I had so many questions, but no way to get answers. Legally, where did I even stand? Did I have any rights as Ethan's father? Could Rebecca just take him away like this? I had spent 14 years being his dad. Didn't that count for something? Or was I just nothing? I felt lost. And worst of all, I didn't know what to do next. I spent the next week in a daze, barely eating, barely sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Ethan's face. I heard his laughter. I remembered the way he used to call me dad. And now, just like that, I wasn't his dad anymore. At least, that's what Rebecca wanted me to believe. But I wasn't going to accept that. Not without a fight. The first thing I did was hire a lawyer. I'll be honest, I had no idea what I was doing. I didn't know if I even had any legal rights. Ethan wasn't biologically mine, and Rebecca had already left, but I wasn't about to roll over and let her erase me from his life. My lawyer, an older guy named Mitchell, didn't sugarcoat things. This is going to be tough, he warned me. Legally, biology does carry weight, but the courts care about more than just DNA. You've been this boy's father for 14 years. That means something. That was all I needed to hear. We filed a petition to challenge Rebecca's custody. If nothing else, I wanted visitation. I needed to see Ethan. I needed to know if he truly wanted to leave me behind, or if Rebecca had fed me lies. But I wasn't prepared for what came next. Rebecca and Ethan's biological father, his name was Daniel, by the way, came back at me hard. Daniel was rich, not just comfortable rich, the kind of wealthy where lawyers magically make problems disappear. And I was his problem. The legal battle turned ugly fast. Rebecca and Daniel painted me as an unfit father. They used everything against me: how I worked 2 jobs, how I was always tired, how we couldn't afford luxury vacations or private school. They made it seem like I had neglected Ethan, like I hadn't spent my entire life breaking my back to give him everything I could. They even brought in people, so-called witnesses, who twisted the truth. Some of them were Rebecca's friends, saying I was always distant, always exhausted. And worst of all, they had Ethan. His testimony was the one thing I had no control over. If he stood up in court and said he wanted to live with them, I was done. I braced myself for the worst. And then Ethan took the stand. I could barely breathe as he sat there, his hands folded in his lap. He was taller now, almost as tall as me. He looked nervous. The judge asked him where he wanted to live. Ethan took a deep breath. And then, in the clearest voice I had ever heard from him, he said, "I want to stay with my dad, my real dad, the one who raised me." The room went silent. Even Rebecca looked stunned. Ethan went on. He told the judge about our camping trips, how I taught him to ride a bike, how I never missed a soccer game. And then he dropped a bombshell. He told the court that Rebecca and Daniel had been coaching him, that they told him to say I was neglectful, that I didn't care about his future, that I was never around. He said he overheard them talking at night, planning how to make me look bad in court, that they even considered paying off some of my coworkers to testify against me. I felt sick. I had known Rebecca betrayed me, but I never thought she'd try to turn my own son against me. The judge listened carefully, asking Ethan more questions. Ethan told him about the real version of our life, that I may not have been rich, but I was always there. And in that moment, I saw it in his eyes. Ethan still loved me. Rebecca and Daniel's case fell apart. The judge ordered an investigation into their attempts to manipulate the trial. Suddenly, all that wealth and power meant nothing, because at the end of the day, the truth mattered, and Ethan had chosen me. It took a few days for the final decision, but when the judge ruled in my favor, granting me full custody, I felt like I could finally breathe again. Ethan ran to me, hugging me so tight I thought my ribs might crack. And for the first time since this nightmare began, I knew I hadn't lost him. I hadn't lost my son, because no matter what biology said, I was his father. The day I won custody of Ethan, I felt like I could finally breathe again. For weeks, I had prepared myself for the worst. I had braced for the possibility that I might lose him forever, that Rebecca and Daniel's money and lies would outweigh everything I had done as a father. But in the end, Ethan chose me, and that meant everything. Still, winning the case was only the beginning. Now, we had to rebuild. Ethan and I went back to our house that night, our home. He hadn't been inside since Rebecca took him away, and I could tell he was nervous. When we walked through the front door, he hesitated, looking around like he expected everything to be different. But it wasn't. His soccer trophies were still on the shelf. His bed was still unmade, just like he always left it. The only thing missing was her. For a long moment, he just stood there. Then he let out a deep breath and said, "It's good to be home." And just like that, the weight in my chest eased. The next few weeks were about adjusting. Ethan was quiet at first, like he wasn't sure what to say. I didn't push him. I just made sure he knew I was there. We fell back into a routine homework at the dining table, late-night movies, me making terrible attempts at cooking while he pretended it was edible. It wasn't perfect. There were nights when I caught him staring off into space, lost in his thoughts. I knew he was struggling, trying to process everything: his mother's betrayal, the court battle, the realization that the man he thought would be his real dad had only seen him as a possession. One night, after dinner, he finally spoke up. "Do you think Mom ever really loved you?" he asked. The question caught me off guard. I thought about lying, telling him what he wanted to hear, but I had spent too much time being lied to myself. So I told him the truth. "I think she thought she did," I said carefully. "But love isn't just about feelings. It's about choices. And when things got hard, she chose herself." Ethan nodded slowly. "She told me I'd be better off with Daniel," he muttered, "that he could give me more." I swallowed. "And do you believe that?" He shook his head. "Money's nice, but it's not the same as being there. He barely even talked to me, just bought me stuff and expected me to be happy about it. That hit me harder than I expected. Rebecca had convinced herself that a bigger house and a bigger paycheck would make up for 14 years of absence. But Ethan wasn't stupid. He saw the difference, and he chose me. That night, for the first time since everything happened, I slept soundly. Rebecca and Daniel weren't completely out of the picture. The judge had granted them some visitation rights, though Ethan had made it clear he didn't want to see them right now. At first, Rebecca called a few times, but Ethan ignored her. Eventually, she stopped trying. I don't know if she ever truly regretted what she did, and honestly, I don't care. She made her choice, and I made mine. As for Daniel, I never saw him again. After the court ruled against him, he dropped out of the picture entirely. No calls, no messages, nothing. Turns out, being a father was only appealing when he thought he could win. But fatherhood isn't a competition. It's showing up every day, no matter how hard it gets. And that's something money can't buy. Ethan and I are still figuring things out. We're going on our first camping trip. Since all this happened, just the two of us, like old times. We packed the same old tent, the same beat-up cooler, and even brought the same terrible canned food we always complain about. I don't know what the future holds. I know there will be tough days where the past creeps in, where the scars feel fresh again. But I also know this. No matter what happens, no matter where life takes us, Ethan will always be my son, and I will always be his father.